Good evening, everyone from my part of the world in Southern Philippines. And thank you to C2G2 for inviting me to give this presentation on views from civil society on geoengineering research and governance. Next slide, please. First slide. As far as civil society that have been engaging on geoengineering are concerned, for us, CBD decisions should be a starting point for geoengineering research and governance. Those of us who have been engaging in the CBD since 2007, 2008 on this issue are fully aware, that the CBD decisions are the only existing UN decisions that directly address concerns on geoengineering. As already presented by Phil earlier, the 2008 moratorium on ocean fertilization, and then the bigger decision, the larger decision on geoengineering in 2010. And of course, a lot of proponents argue that these are soft laws, these are not moratorium, these have no legal weight. But we cannot deny that these decisions reflect the consensus views of CBD member states. And I don't think it's going to give us any progress in this discussion if we continue to undermine the weight that the CBD brings into this discussion on geoengineering governance and research. And also, we have to bear in mind that CBD decisions, soft law or not, were able to stop geoengineering experiments, real experiments, outdoor experiments, which only point to the importance given by governments to these decisions that reflect consensus views of UN member states. In 2009, the Lohaft experiment, the German-Indian experiment, was actually stopped in view of the provisions in the 2008 decision on ocean fertilization, so which actually violates that. So that was actually stopped. In 2012, there was an experiment off Vancouver Island that happened actually coincidentally at the end of the COP, the Conference of the Parties in Hyderabad, and this was also raised in the plenary. The experiment went on. Of course, the Canadian government did not even know about it, but the Canadian government acted post facto, also citing the decisions that came out from the CBD. Next, please. Next slide. Okay. And we also believe that the precautionary principle should be a cornerstone in the whole discussion of geoengineering governance and research. It should not be a risk-risk assessment that weighs unknown climate impacts against potential promises of geoengineering. That to us, precautionary principle is a basis for environmental decision-making, and the key components should always be observed, namely taking preventive action in the face of uncertainty. There's also, of course, some perversion and misuse of that by some proponents of geoengineering. And also we have to emphasize that the shifting the burden of proof to the proponents of an activity is important, and also the importance of exploring a wide range of alternatives to possibly harmful actions. And lastly, but equally important, which was actually emphasized by the presentation of Yolanda, is the importance of increasing public participation in decision making on governance and research of geoengineering, in line with the precautionary principle. Next, please. Next slide, please. We oppose the outdoor experiments, believing that this could lead to slippery slopes. Outdoor experiments on geoengineering technologies will have consequent effects on the environment, no matter how local, no matter how small scale that proponents argue they are. And also it is notable that in many of these experiments, there is a notable absence of comprehensive EIA or environmental impact assessment, specifically impacts on biodiversity that are notably absent in these geoengineering proposals for outdoor experiments. And to us, allowing outdoor experiments, apart from going into the slippery slope, it leads to public conditioning that it's safe and thus justifying bigger ones. There's also a very important consideration about the moral implications. In particular, for example, the US, in the case of SCOPEX, planning or allowing outdoor experiments to provide proof of principle on two grounds, that it takes advantage of the loophole that the US is a non-party to the CBD, therefore outside of the application or scope of whatever decision was adopted by member states in that platform. Also, we should take into account that in this whole debate, we cannot just ignore the fact that the US, for example, has distanced itself and threatened to even withdraw from the Paris Agreement, while at the same time supporting this outdoor experiment that would allow a cop-out from on global warming. So those moral implications and ethical debates are important in these discussions as well. Next slide, please. NGOs are also raising concerns about the destruction and diversion presented by geoengineering experiments. The promises of quick fixes to global warming actually distract us from real solutions involving paradigm shift, structural transformation, and lifestyle changes. They may say that these are just supplemental to deep cuts, to real cuts and genuine mitigation. But we're talking here of a context where there are scarce resources that could be diverted from much more important, proven, and readily deployable alternatives to such large-scale, high-tech technologies such as geoengineering, particularly solarization management. So instead of using those resources to deploy and promote proven and readily deployable alternatives, those resources get actually diverted. Instead, we should really focus on the need to consider transformative emission reduction options based on existing technologies and in line with SDGs and planetary boundaries. Next, please. Next slide. We also have to take into account that while we're discussing this issue in the context of the CBD, the realm of geoengineering issues actually transcend climate change or even biodiversity. These are way beyond the realm of the CBD and the UNFCCC, and even way beyond the mandate of individual UN agencies. So in many ways, we're talking here of planetary survival, which is not just about biodiversity or climate change. And if you go back, zoom in to the CBD and put the whole discussion of geoengineering in that context, there are far more important issues than geoengineering that the CBD should pay attention to. Many outstanding matters on biodiversity and climate change, particularly those that are relevant to indigenous peoples in local communities that need urgent attention and more resources. Next, please. Next slide. So among the biggest questions that civil society always raise on the issue of geoengineering, in particular on soil radiation management, is the question on who will make decisions and how these decisions are going to be made. In reality, while we have CBD as the only body in the UN platform that has discussed and tackled geoengineering head-on since a few years back, the UN has no experience or a mechanism to allow countries to decide on the basis of winners or losers that will result from technological interventions such as SRM. Phil and I think it was Dr. McMartin who also already mentioned about the unequal impacts, the varying regional consequences of SRM. So there will be ultimately winners or losers. And I think that is really clear when we talk of governance, that the bottom line of the decision making here will be who will be the winners and the losers. Next, please. I will go into my next slide. So key, as emphasized by Yolanda, is the issue of participation and transparency. And that is non-negotiable, and participation here is at different levels, at the local, national, and regional levels, and will involve societal participation in deliberations and decision-making. Next, please. That will be my last slide. Next slide. Many of us in civil society who have been engaging in this process are actually calling for a ban on geoengineering. But when we talk of governance of geoengineering, it's not just about how to facilitate or promote research or deployment. Governance is also about how to enforce a decision to ban geoengineering. And that would require sound governance at the highest levels with the broadest participation of society, especially those who will most likely be impacted. So thank you.